This film draws inspiration from the lives of two former slaves, Gordon and Whipped Peter. Their harrowing experiences became widely known through a photograph showcasing a man severely whipped back, published globally in 1863. This image served as compelling evidence of slavery's brutality, fueling the abolitionist movement. Welcome to your daily dose of Movie Pill. Today, we'll be looking at a 2022 movie titled Emancipation. Spoilers ahead, and let's dive right in. In 1863, Peter toils as an enslaved worker on a cotton plantation alongside his wife Dodine and their children. When he discovers he's been sold to a new master, he shares a final prayerful moment with his family. However, white men soon arrive and forcefully take him away, disregarding the children's desperate pleas. Despite Peter's resistance and outcry, the men threaten Dodine with a gun, compelling him to comply. Misbehaving slaves face various punishments. Some are whipped, others are shot in the field, and some are branded on the face by the overseer, Fassel. Fassel's right-hand men are Harrington and Knowles. Peter strives to maintain good behavior. When he attempts to assist his friend Gordon, who has fallen, he is reprimanded for diverting from work duties. One evening, as the slaves return to their enclosure, they witness John being thrust inside, writhing in pain from a recent branding on his cheek. Another slave, Thomas, trembles in fear. Peter consoles him, urging him to think of his loved ones and view their situation as mere labor. He offers words of faith, suggesting that God watches over them. However, John dismisses Peter's faith, doubting a caring deity. Undeterred by the skepticism, Peter remains composed, pledging to pray for John. Later, Peter eavesdrops on two white guards discussing significant news. President Lincoln has emancipated the slaves, leading many to flee to Baton Rouge seeking refuge. The conversation is abruptly halted when a guard notices Thomas's error with the food and plans to punish him. Peter intervenes, defending Thomas as just a young boy. In response, the guard strikes Peter and aims his gun at him, prepared to execute him for his audacity. However, Fassel intervenes, as he has taken a keen interest in Peter due to his defiant nature. Later, while Peter is confined in a cage, Fassel approaches him, declaring himself Peter's god and Peter his dog. Peter retorts that he should then be fed the same food as the dogs. Fassel laughs it off, but the following day, he shackles Peter and forces him to kneel before him. Fassel's dog barks and snarls at Peter, with only inches separating them. The dog now associates Peter's scent with a threat. During lunch, Peter informs the other slaves about Lincoln's emancipation and the possibility of reaching Baton Rouge, a 5-day journey through the swamps. While some express reservations due to the challenging conditions of the swamp, Peter persuades them by pointing out their chances of survival in their current situation are slim. Encouraged, a few men join his cause, and they begin planning their escape. Sometime later, a slave dies while working, and the guards instruct Peter to drag the body to a communal pit where bodies are discarded. There are white deserters present who should be digging, but upon seeing Peter, they insist that a black man should handle the task. Reluctantly, Peter takes a shovel to bury the body. Recognizing this is the opportune moment to execute their escape plan, he awaits for the guards to be distracted by an explosion on the field. Seizing the opportunity, Peter attacks the guard with a shovel, steals a knife, and makes his escape. Witnessing Peter's escape, other slaves and deserters seize the opportunity to flee as well. John manages to grab a gun from a fallen guard. As the alarm is raised, guards begin firing at the fleeing slaves, aiming to eliminate as many as possible before they disappear into the forest. Fassel joins in the shooting, targeting the deserters. Furious that Peter has escaped, he summons Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to pursue him. Peter teams up with 3 friends and leads them through the forest, listening carefully for approaching dangers. They eventually reach the swamps, and while most of the group manages to cross without incident, Thomas freezes at the sight of crocodiles, allowing the dogs to catch up to him. After the dogs inflict enough harm, Fassel calls them back and demands to know the group's destination. Thomas remains silent, prompting Fassel to offer a deal. Reveal the group's plans and Thomas will be allowed to leave. Terrified, Thomas confesses, but as soon as he turns to enter the swamp, Fassel shoots him, leaving him to be devoured by crocodiles. Meanwhile, Peter, John, and Gordon successfully navigate the swamp and continue their escape. Peter suggests they take the alternate swamp route, but John, wanting independence, opts for the horse trail, confident in the gun he acquired. Gordon is inclined to follow Peter, but Peter believes splitting up will make them harder to track. He advises Gordon to follow the sounds of Lincoln's cannons. As Peter charts his own path, he realizes his leg is bleeding from a gunshot wound. He needs to address it quickly to avoid detection by the pursuing dog, but first, he needs to distance himself from Fassel. Soon, Peter stumbles upon a house owned by a white family that also owns slaves. He quickly fashions a tourniquet using a vine from a tree to stop the bleeding. Sneaking around a pile of logs, he manages to get some water from a pump and spots clothes hanging on a line. Taking a gamble, Peter dashes across the garden and snatches a shirt before disappearing into the woods. However, a child from the family spots him and rings a bell to alert the household. Hearing the commotion, Fassel arrives at the house and is directed by the family on Peter's escape route. Peter sprints as fast as he can, pausing briefly to wrap his wound with a stolen shirt. Soon after, he discards the bloodied shirt in a trunk for the dogs to discover, while he submerges himself in the swamp water. Fassel and his men are fooled by the ruse, heading down the road under the impression that Peter has crossed the swamp. However, Peter emerges once the coast is clear. Suddenly, a crocodile lunges at him. Thinking quickly, Peter fends it off with a sturdy branch branch before dispatching it with his knife. Meanwhile, Dodine wakes from a nightmare where she sees her husband in peril. The children also wake, concerned for their father, but Dodine assures them he's alive, having survived challenges no ordinary man could endure. As night falls, Peter takes refuge in a tree, using his knife to remove leeches from his body, inadvertently causing some blood to drip onto the surrounding foliage. Fassel and his men discover the deceased crocodile, but upon opening it, find it empty. Deducing that Peter has escaped through this route, the group sets up camp for the night, feasting on the crocodile. Harrington even compliments Peter on his resourcefulness. Fassel reprimands him, recalling a lesson from his father. Giving even small concessions to people would lead them to demand more, including their jobs and lands. The next morning, Peter continues his escape, covering himself with mud and animal waste to mask his scent. Despite attracting flies as he crosses another swamp, he prays for protection in the dangers and interprets a sudden burst of sunlight as a positive omen. While Fassel divides his group to search wider areas, Peter stumbles upon an abandoned treehouse stocked with clean water and leftover food. Discovering hot coals, he uses them to sterilize his knife and cauterize his leg wound. He then uses the coals to smoke out a beehive, allowing him to collect honey after the bees disperse. Fassel notices the smoke and heads towards it, but Peter is already departed. The treehouse also contains a boat, currently occupied by a snake. Carefully, Peter nudges the snake away with a branch, then boards the boat and sets sail, relishing the sweet taste of the stolen honey. Meanwhile, Dodine's master informs her that she's been sold and will be leaving in 2 days. She's distressed to learn that her children can't accompany her, as her new owner plans to assign her a new husband. Overwhelmed by the news and determined to avoid being sold, Dodine takes a drastic step. She deliberately places her hand into a cotton processing machine, feigning an accident. Back with Fassel, his dog leads him to the treehouse, enabling him to track Peter's route as he crosses the river. Peter heads into the woods and unexpectedly encounters John, who is upset because he believes the white man will now pursue him too. Peter assures him they're not being trailed and advises John on masking his scent, but John disregards his advice and they resume running. Shortly after, they hear the dogs barking and scramble to hide. Peter conceals himself inside an empty trunk while John climbs a tree. Despite their efforts, the dogs track John's scent, leading Fassel and his men directly to him. When John refuses to descend, Fassel shoots him down and resorts to violent interrogation to extract information about Peter, but John remains silent. Fassel orders Harrington and Knowles to decapitate John and deliver his head to camp as a warning. Peter shuts his eyes, offering a prayer for John's soul as he waits for Fassel to leave. Once he feels it's safe, Peter emerges from his hiding spot in the trunk, only to see the gruesome aftermath of John's death, deeply unsettling him. As he trudges on, he witnesses a group of horses galloping by, one of them ablaze. Intrigued, he follows their trail to a plantation house engulfed in flames, its white inhabitants all dead. It appears the enslaved people had rebelled upon hearing Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Cautiously, knife in hand, Peter enters the house, proceeding room by room until he discovers a dining table laden with food and wine. Overwhelmed by hunger and fatigue, he indulges until a strange noise from upstairs grabs his attention. Following the sound, he finds a girl trapped beneath a tarp, her fingers still playing a desperate tune for help. Peter swiftly rescues the girl, placing her on a table outside before attempting to fetch water. However, the terrified girl insists he stay, offering her cross pendant. Realizing she seeks to comfort in prayer, Peter accepts the pendant and assures her of God's presence. Lost in the moment, Peter fails to notice Harrington approaching until it's too late. To avoid being shot, he drops his knife and steps away from the girl. Tragically, the girl succumbs to her injuries as Peter retreats. Enraged, he turns on Harrington, using the cross as a makeshift stake to end his life. Just as Knowles arrives, Peter seizes Harrington's weapon, shooting Knowles before he can react. Knowles attempts to reason with Peter, suggesting that someone capable of killing a crocodile might find a place in Fassel's ranks. Disgusted, Peter labels him the worst kind and leaves him to his fate. As Fassel's approach becomes evident due to the barking dogs, Peter dashes into the cotton fields for cover. When a dog gets too close, he doesn't hesitate to shoot it. Fassel, stumbling upon Harrington's lifeless body, becomes even more resolute in his pursuit of Peter. The following morning, Peter reaches a beach with the bodies of white men who fell in battles against Lincoln's forces. While there are no provisions to be found, he spots ships in the distance and hears the distant roar of cannons, signaling the presence of Lincoln's troops. Filled with renewed hope and the prospect of freedom, Peter resumes his run. However, he's suddenly knocked to the ground by a horse and confronted by Fassel, offering Peter some of the meat he'd once requested in the cage. Fassel demands obedience. When Peter refuses, Fassel aims his gun, asserting his godlike authority. Just as he prepares to fire, another shot rings out, felling Fassel. Declaring Fassel no god, Peter turns to his rescuers, Lieutenant Caillou and Lincoln's native guard. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and hunger, Peter is taken to the infirmary tent at their Baton Rouge camp. Due to an infected leg wound, the nun nurse insists on rest, and for several days, Peter is consumed by dreams of his family. Once Peter's health improves, he approaches a soldier to obtain his emancipation papers, fabricating details like his age where needed. However, he's not permitted to leave and search for his family immediately. The white soldiers exploit the slaves' legal limbo, offering them two options: work on federal farms or enlist in the army. Initially resistant to more servitude, Peter relents upon learning that joining the army could be his path to freedom and potentially reuniting with his family. Soon after, Peter learns that the army has also found Gordon, who is injured but alive. While relieved to see him, Peter struggles to share the news of John's fate. He then visits Caillou to receive his uniform, where he's approached about participation in a photograph. Initially hesitant, Peter is reassured by Caillou that the photographers mean no harm and aim to expose the harsh realities of slavery to the world. Agreeing, Peter bares his scarred back for the camera, revealing the brutal marks of countless lashings. Subsequently, Peter meets with the general, who seeks information about the enemy's railroad construction. After Peter provides the information he has, the general examines his photograph, remarking that the scars indicate disobedience, a trait not favored in the army. Caillou attempts to intervene, but Peter stands his ground. He explains that those scars are a testament to his resilience, having endured numerous beatings yet never giving up, a quality vital for a soldier. At dawn, Caillou leads Peter and his troops to the trenches, rallying them with an impassioned speech about fighting for freedom. Despite many soldiers falling to enemy fire during the march, the group remains undeterred, pressing forward into the fray. The battlefield soon becomes engulfed in flames, and Peter is wounded by an explosion, momentarily losing consciousness in a muddy puddle. Upon regaining consciousness, Peter perseveres, pushing through his injuries to continue aiding his comrades. He fires at the enemy whenever possible and offers words of solace to dying allies he encounters. As the battle rages on, Caillou falls in combat, and Peter eventually locates a wounded Gordon. Seeing his friend in distress fuels Peter's resolve, prompting him to abandon his cover and charge towards the enemy lines. With the intention to disable the cannons, Peter becomes a beacon of inspiration for the soldiers who rally behind him. The native guard overwhelms their adversaries, securing victory. With the war concluded, the army embarks on a mission to liberate slaves from every plantation. Upon reaching the plantation where Peter once toiled, the inhabitants initially struggle to believe the news of their freedom. However, joy soon prevails as the reality of their liberation sinks in. Witnessing his former master face justice, Peter embarks on a desperate search for his family, experiencing profound despair when initially unable to locate them. Yet, as he offers a prayer, a divine intervention leads him to reunite with his wife and children, who rush to embrace him. The photograph capturing the real Peter becomes an emblematic symbol, circulating globally and etching its mark on history. By 1863, thanks to Lincoln's proclamation, over 400,000 black individuals had seized their freedom. By 1865, nearly 4 million slaves in America were officially recognized as free. Peter's journey from enslavement to freedom is a powerful testament to resilience, courage, and the human spirit's indomitable will. His story, filled with adversity and triumph, reminds us of the enduring legacy of those who fought against injustice. I rate this movie a 7.5 out of 10. Comment down below what you would rate it. Looks like this movie pill is starting to wear off. But don't worry, there's always more where that came from. Tap here to keep the effects going with this next movie, because who can stop at just one? And while you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your next movie dose is just a click away.